If we never question the beliefs that we have and we never question whether or not something is possible, we are bound to keep living as if that's the only reality, as if that's the only possibility, when in fact the sky is the limit, not just for abundance of any resource, but the amount of self-love we can have. Welcome back and happy Monday. I'm Krista Vieira, and I've got a great topic for you today, I think, and it's something that's tied in with a masterclass that I'm going to be doing tomorrow, which is Amplifying Abundance, which there's a link to at the bottom of this podcast and this YouTube. However, just before I share anything further about that, essentially what I want to do today is just tell you a story about how, you know, the beliefs that I've had in my life, there are times where they've served me. And then there's times where they no longer were in alignment with who I was and who I was becoming. And that line, when it changes from being supportive of who you are and supportive of the life that you're trying to live and the life that you're creating and the things that you're doing in your experience, that line between who you've been and where it was supporting you and where you want to go, that is a very interesting line. And I think that sometimes it exists without our knowledge. Sometimes we don't really know where that line is. So a few years ago, I was working with a money and mindset and business coach out of the UK. And one of the things that I had to do within this program, it was a Bob Proctor based program called Thinking into Results. One of the things that I had to do in this program is I had to write down a financial goal on a card that I had to carry in my pocket. And it had to be in the present tense, and it had to say, I am so happy and grateful now that, and then basically list the monthly income that I was hoping to make. I did this because I'm a very good student. I'm a person who, when there's something that I've decided to do. So I've joined a coaching program. I've decided that I'm going to upgrade my awareness. I'm going to learn a process or processes or systems that are going to help to support me in the goals that I have in my life, in who it is that I want to be in my life. I take that time seriously. I call myself a good student, but really I just wanted to learn everything I possibly could. I wanted my investment to be beneficial, not just in terms of giving me a return through what I had created, but giving me a return in myself. You know, the biggest investments that we make in life are really investments in ourselves. And a lot of times we have a hard time with that trade. We have a hard time actually saying, you know, I'm going to take this time or this money or this energy and spend it on myself. You know, you might be able to relate to that. So I had joined this program and I was going through there was 12 modules that we had to work through in this program, going through all the modules. I'm doing all the homework. And when I get to this part, this was even just very much at the very beginning, and I'm doing this and I'm writing this down. I remember when I wrote down that financial goal, there was a sinking feeling that I had inside. There was a sinking feeling, and it went right down into my gut. And this thought that popped into my head when I was writing this down and when I was reading this out loud to myself was, this is never going to happen. Clear as day, that thought came through. That's never going to happen. And I remember just feeling dejected. I felt not because the money wouldn't come, not because of that. I felt dejected because I realized I had no idea how to make that happen. There was a part of me that was not, and at the time I wouldn't have had this terminology, but there was a part of me that was not a vibrational match to where I wanted to go. I couldn't fathom how it was possible for me to earn that level of income. I had no idea how I was going to be able to create that. And what was very interesting about this particular moment in time, this whole episode's a bit of a vulnerable share for me. But what was really interesting about that is I realized that there was a part of me who felt like I wasn't worth it. And there's this really beautiful book in the world by Lynn Twist called The Soul of Money. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend getting it. And in this book, she defines abundance as knowing that you have enough. And you could define, the things in life that we have, not just as, money isn't the only thing that we might want to have enough of. We also might want to have enough time. We also might want to have enough energy. We also might want to have enough freedom or enough choice or enough belief in ourselves or enough confidence or enough self-worth. And so abundance, from reading that book many, many years ago, abundance has always had this energy to me. It's always had this frequency. It's always been about that enoughness. And in that moment, when I wrote that amount down on that card, and I realized that there was a part of me that felt like I wasn't worth it or I didn't deserve it, I flipped back in my head to a moment in time where I had an interchange with a former employer. And in that interchange with that employer, I had given my notice and I was leaving the employ. And there were some bonuses that were supposed to be paid out. This was when I was much younger, my early 20s. There were some bonuses that were supposed to be paid out for some work I had done. And I'm about to leave the province. Like I'm moving, I'm in shift, I'm doing all these things. And I'm trying to negotiate for these bonuses, like bonuses I didn't think that I needed to negotiate for because it was written in my contract. These were very clearly defined as things that should be paid out to me. So I didn't even think it was an issue until I was told that I wasn't going to be paid. And I'm in the process of, explaining, where I'm coming from and where all this is, where it's very clearly defined that these bonuses should be paid and all of this. When my employer in the middle of the meeting stands up and looks at me and says, "You're not worth it," and then leaves the room, leaves the negotiation, leaves the conversation. And I remember in that moment as an, person in my early 20s, as somebody who gave their all to their work, as somebody who deeply tried to show up for the businesses that I was a part of and the workplaces. Every time I had a job, I always took it on as my job, my place, my business. I always tried to show up with this energy of how can I help and what can I contribute? And in that moment, my self-esteem was zero. And shortly after that, I moved to Alberta. And I remember I got another job. And I got a job as an administrative assistant. And in that job, I was supposed to be printing reports and doing all sorts of things. And I got very early in my employ there, I was given the task of printing a report. And it was supposed to be printed double-sided. And when I hit the printer button and everything, and it was going to the big copier, a few minutes later, I go over to check on it. It's coming out single-sided, which means it needs to be redone. And I'm telling you this story to show you exactly how low my self-esteem was. My self-esteem in that moment was so low that I thought that they would fire me because I had printed a report single-sided instead of double-sided. Can you imagine firing somebody for making that kind of an honest mistake? But that's where my level was at. That's where my self-esteem was at. That's where my self-confidence was at. There was this moment in time where so many things just came together, and my self-esteem and my self-confidence and everything just squashed to zero. And so fast forward years, 15 years in the future, I'm writing this goal down on a goal card. And I realized that there was a part of me who is deeply believing for some reason that I'm not worth it, that I am not worth it. And I realized in that moment that it had nothing to do with the money. It had nothing to do with the money. It had everything to do with my perception of myself from an energetic level and from a space of what I was willing to receive. Maybe some of you can also relate to this. I also had these energetic kind of layers of me. I was a giver. I would give. And when somebody would try to give something back to me, I had this terrible time receiving. you might be able to relate to that, where it's really easy to give everything that you have, your energy, your time, your love. If somebody asks you to do something extra or somebody asks you for a favor, you're happy to show up. And when somebody tries to repay that favor or give that energy back to you, you find that you have very little capacity to receive that love or that energy. It's almost like a part of you is rejecting it, saying, no, not me. No, I don't deserve that. Oh, you don't have to do that. Don't worry about it. How many times have we said that? And I think of us, primarily as women, but I know that anybody could be listening to this and maybe having a similar story or experience in their mind. The reality is that many of us equate what we're capable of receiving to a subconscious relationship with what we believe we're worth. That's what I had been doing. And so to go on with my story, for a while there, because I'm a good student, I was like, okay, this has worked for a lot of people. I'm just going to try this out. Like, I'm going to suspend my disbelief. And I had to consciously do that. I had to suspend my disbelief in the process, or my doubt that it was going to work, because I had committed to giving it a real shot. And I'm in this program and I've invested. At this point, I need to see if it's going to work. And so every day I would put that goal card in my pocket. I would read that goal card in the morning. I would read it whenever, throughout the day I could. And so I would, my hand would go into my pocket at some point throughout the day. I would feel the goal card. I knew what it said, so I was subconsciously reading it to myself again. And something very interesting happened. Over the span of probably 2-3 months, it wasn't immediate, I started to feel very neutral towards that card. I started to feel like that card and the words on it, they weren't possible in my mind, but they weren't impossible either. I had gotten accustomed to those words. The original emotional and mental and physical rejection that I had to those words wasn't the same. It had lessened quite a bit, to the point where I could read those words and a part of me was like, well, maybe, I don't know how, but maybe. And I started to notice that, and I started to notice how I had shifted from this dejected, discouraged, disbelieving frame of mind to one that was now saying, well, I don't really know, maybe that's possible. And I realized that I was starting to form a new possibility, a new potential in my mindset about what I was capable of. And I knew that, because within the program, the goal card wasn't the only thing we were doing. We were also looking at our limiting beliefs. We were also starting to trump the inaction of our lives, the things that we knew how to do. We were learning how to get ourselves into aligned action so that we could actually move things forward in a way that was aligned with our goals and our vision. And I was doing all of those things. I was taking the action. I was showing up every day. I was doing the morning routine. I was doing the practice. I was doing the homework. I was doing it all. And I was deeply, deeply committed to transformation, which meant I was in the trenches. Because when we're transforming, it is not a comfortable process, as we all know. When we're going from limiting beliefs, when we're going from lack of confidence, when we're going from misalignment, when we're going from anything that's, any perceived obstacles in front of us. And we know that the only way over it is true transformation, not just more effort, not just more struggle, not just more of something, but actual shifting, lateral shifting of identity and ideas. I was committed to that process. I really wanted to know what was possible. I was willing to do the work because I knew that I was the only thing in my way. I knew that I was the one holding the limiting beliefs. I knew that I was the one with the scarcity mindset. I knew that I was the one with the independence, saying I have to do this all myself. And I knew that none of that was true. I knew that none of that was true. And so I started to ask myself some different questions, and I started to do this work with a new kind of energy. And I started to see the shifting in my relationship with the goal card. And from there, I just kept going to the point where I started to look at that goal card and I said, yep, that's absolutely possible. The reason I'm telling you this story is because the relationship with enough and the relationship with abundance for me really shifted when I shifted the beliefs that I had in myself. When I shifted my relationship with receiving and giving. When I shifted my relationship, my energetic relationship with scarcity, lack, that lone wolf syndrome of I have to do it all myself. When I started to give myself a new way of looking at things. It was energetic. It was also based in action. And it had a lot to do with how I perceived myself and what I was allowing myself to receive. This was an inside job. It was an inside job. And I'm sharing this because so often we think it has to do with the outside. We think it has to do with the opportunities that come our way. And we think it has to do with the circumstances that we find ourselves in. And it has to do with what our employer is willing to pay us, or how much groceries are, or taxes, or anything like that. And while that is very much a reality, so much of the opportunities and the circumstances are framed by the beliefs and the perceptions we're holding in our own minds. And when those change, the circumstances don't change, but the perception of them and the way that we can work with them, that changes. And that was the biggest shift for me, was realizing that the only limitations that are holding me back and that have power over me are the ones in my mind that I'm giving power to that are not true and that are not in alignment with where I want to go. So anyways, I hope that this landed with you today, or that there's some piece of this that stood out for you or that was helpful for you. And if you are interested in learning a little bit more about abundance, or maybe expanding some of your own framework around receiving, around abundance, around energetic alignment with abundance, tomorrow I am doing a masterclass called Amplifying Abundance at 12 p.m. MST. There is a link below, and I hope that you can join me for that. But in the meantime, I just want to say there are so many things that are outside of our control. The one thing that we do get to decide on, and that we do get to, if we're on a journey of transformation and growth and alignment, the one thing that we do get to start to have some effect over, some energy, a relationship with, is our state of being and the perception that we hold of the world and of possibility and of our own belief. If we never question the beliefs that we have, and we never question whether or not something is possible, we are bound to keep living as if that's the only reality, as if that's the only possibility, when in fact the sky is the limit, not just for abundance of any resource, but the amount of self-love we can have, the amount of belief in ourselves. And the beautiful thing is that when we start doing this work for ourselves, it starts to translate over. When we have self-compassion, we get to start to have that compassion for other people. We are more likely to be able to be compassionate. We're more likely to be able to be accepting. We're more likely to be able to be loving and forgiving and kind. And it is just the snowball effect, but it starts by coming inside and saying, what's the state? What is the relationship? What is the belief in myself? Am I worth it? And as we answer those questions more and more in alignment with truth, we start to see we've always been worth it. So if there was ever any doubt, I hope that this has given you something to ponder in terms of that. And I want you to know that you are worth everything. So with that, I'm going to sign off for today. I'm wishing you the most wonderful day, the most wonderful week, and I will see you soon. Take care.